Address is missing. Oh no, she's here. Good morning. The 10,068th meeting of the Security Council is called to order. The provisional agenda for this meeting is the situation in the Middle East, including the Palestinian question. The agenda is adopted. In accordance with Rule 37 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the representative of Israel to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. I propose that the Council invite the permanent observer of the Observer State of Palestine to the United Nations to participate in the meeting, in accordance with the Provisional Rules of Procedure and the previous practice in this regard. There being no objection, it is so decided. In accordance with Rule 39 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite Mr. Ramiz Alakbarov, Deputy Special Coordinator for the Middle East Peace Process, United Nations Resident and Humanitarian Coordinator, to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. The Security Council will now begin its consideration of the item 2 of the agenda. I wish to draw the attention of the Council members to document S/2025/807, the report of the Secretary General on the implementation of Security Council Resolution 2334. I now give the floor to Mr. Ramiz Alakbarov.
Mr. President, members of the Security Council, today's briefing is devoted to the Secretary General's quarterly report on the implementation of the Resolution 2334. Before turning to the report, allow me a few remarks. At the outset, I reiterate the Secretary General condemnation of Sunday's heinous terror attack on Jewish families gathered to celebrate Hanukkah in Sydney, Australia. I share in the grief of the Jewish community and stand with Jewish families worldwide as they mark the festival of Hanukkah, which celebrate light vanquishing darkness. Mr. President, turning to the situation in Gaza, the ceasefire remains fragile, as we have seen with continued attacks and strikes in Gaza. I welcome the ongoing efforts by the mediators to avert further escalation, support implementation of the current commitments, including the recovery and return of the last Israeli hostage, and to advance discussions on the next phase and implementation of the comprehensive Gaza in line with UN Security Resolution 2803. The UN is doing its part to support the ceasefire and meet the staggering needs of the population. The UN's winterization efforts are underway, distributing tents, blankets, and other essential supplies, reaching people where they are. But conditions remain dire, and the risk of hypothermia is increasing with the onset of the winter weather. Tragically, the first hypothermia-related death, a 2-week-old newborn boy from Khan Yunis, was confirmed. Preserving and expanding of space with humanitarian partners, including through the community. I welcome the partial reopening of the Allenby King Hussein Bridge crossing for the transfer of aid to Gaza following a deadly attack on Israeli soldiers there in September. However, supplies through this route are currently capped at low levels. Large quantities of aid are prepositioned in warehouses in Jordan, awaiting full resumption. I urge the authorities of Israel to enable the timely and at-scale movement of life-saving assistance through the Jordan Mr. President, indeed concerning development on 8 December, Israeli authorities forcibly entered the UNRWA compound in East Jerusalem, seizing property and replacing the UN flag with Israeli flag. The Secretary General strongly condemned these actions and emphasized that the compound remains United Nations premises and is inviolable and immune from any other form of interference. On 11 December, Israeli cabinet decided to approve or regularize 19 settlements in the occupied West Bank. This includes the settlements of Ganim and Kadim in the northern West Bank, which has been evacuated by Israel in 2005. Mr. President, I will now turn to highlighting some of the Secretary General's observation on the implementation of the Security Council Resolution 2334 of the year 2016 during the reporting period. I welcome the ceasefire in Gaza based on U.S. President's plan to end the Gaza conflict and through the tireless mediation efforts of Egypt, Qatar, Turkey, and the United States. The ceasefire offers a critical opportunity to halt the bloodshed and improve the humanitarian situation. I urge Israel and Hamas to fully implement the ceasefire, exercise maximum restraint, and adhere to international law, including relevant UN resolutions. The ceasefire must be consolidated to enable recovery and reconstruction in Gaza. The United Nations stands ready. I welcome the release of all living hostages held by Hamas in Gaza, and I am relieved that families are being reunited after long periods of anguish. I call for the immediate return of the remains of the last deceased hostage. The International Committee of the Red Cross, ICRC, has been indispensable in I reiterate the protection of the report, including sexual violence and by the withholding of some families. I unequivocally condemn the killing and injury of civilians in Gaza, including children and women. While the ceasefire has largely held, periodic Israeli military strikes continue, causing significant civilian casualties and extensive damages to homes and infrastructure. Armed Palestinian attacks against Israeli soldiers have also continued. Gunfire and shelling near withdrawal lines and attacks on civilians attempting to return home or access land have resulted in further loss of life. Such incidents must immediately cease. I am deeply concerned by the dire humanitarian situation in Gaza, where infrastructure damage is catastrophic. While hunger has improved due to increased aid and commercial foods out of reach for most of the population, alongside with severe sources of clean water, medical care, and shelter. Humanitarian access remains restricted, with aid convoys facing logistical and security obstacles. I call on all parties to respect humanitarian law and allow the full unimpeded entry of humanitarian assistance. I condemn relentless Israeli settlement expansions in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, which fuels tensions, impedes Palestinian land access, and threatens the viability of the contiguous and sovereign Palestinian state. Expanding settlement, including outposts, coincides with rising settler attacks, further entrenching the unlawful occupation and violating international law, undermining Palestinian self-determination. All Israeli settlements in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, and related infrastructure have no legal validity and violate international law and UN resolutions. In 2025, settlement advancement reached its highest point since UN began tracking in 2017. I urge Israel to abide by its obligation under international law, recalling the International Court of Justice opinion of 19 July 2024, which obliges Israel to cease all settlement activities, evacuate settlers, and end its unlawful presence in the occupied Palestinian territory promptly. Escalating violence and tensions in the West Bank are alarming. Israeli security operations in the Northwest Bank caused high fatalities, population displacement, and large-scale destruction, especially in refugee camps. Continued Israeli security presence in camps contravenes obligations to end the unlawful occupation. I condemn rising settler violence across the West Bank, which intensified during the olive harvest. Attacks have become more frequent and violent, often with the presence or support of Israeli security forces. Palestinian farmers have faced assault, harassment, and obstruction from their lands. Olive trees are uprooted or burned, and the entire harvest destroyed. These attacks deprive families of vital livelihoods and risk forcible displacement. Israeli authorities must prevent attacks, hold perpetrators accountable, and ensure the safe access for farmers. I condemn continued armed attacks by Palestinians against Israelis. All violence against civilians, including terror, must cease immediately, with perpetrators held accountable. I remain concerned about large numbers of Palestinians, including children, detained by Israel since 7 October 2023, including administrative detention without charge or trial. Reports of torture, ill treatment, including sexual violence, and deaths in custody are deeply concerning. Israel must use detention as a last resort for the shortest period, prevent ill treatment, and end administrative detention of children. I'm appalled by officials glorifying violence and engaging in dangerous provocations, incitement, and inflammatory language. Incitement to violence must stop immediately. I am deeply concerned by the Palestinian authorities' prolonged fiscal crisis, further destabilizing the economy, undermining trust, exacerbating insecurity, and eroding social order. Israeli authorities must seek unilateral economic measures that threaten peace and stability. I remain committed to supporting Palestinians and Israel, resolving the conflict in line with international law, UN resolution, and bilateral agreements, pursuing a two-state vision, Israel and a fully independent, democratic, contiguous, viable, sovereign Palestinian state, including Gaza, living side by side in peace and security, based on pre-1967 lines with Jerusalem as the capital of both states. I thank you for your attention.
I thank Mr. Alakbarov for his briefing. I now give the floor to those council members who wish to make statements. I give the floor to the representative of France.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. President. France condemned in the strongest terms the horrific anti-Semitic terrorist attack that has affected Australia. Nothing can justify such violence, and we have presented our condolences to the victims, to their families, and to the Australian people. Mr. President, grateful to the Deputy Special Coordinator, Mr. Ramiz Alakbarov, for his briefing. A month ago, the Council adopted Resolution 2803, aimed at implementing the peace plan for Gaza presented by President Trump. This resolution endorsed the progress obtained over the past few months, and in particular supporting the efforts of the U.S., Egypt, Qatar, and Turkey. The ceasefire, the release of hostages, and resumption still insufficient of humanitarian assistance. This is a first step which must be fully consolidated. The ceasefire must be fully respected by the parties, and the massive delivery of humanitarian aid must be ensured throughout Gaza by the United Nations and their partners. The last body of a hostage must be returned. It's also urgent to allow for the deployment of the International Stabilization Force, the disarmament of Hamas, and withdrawal of Israeli forces. In parallel, the establishment of a transition government in Gaza must lead to a return of a reformed Palestinian Authority, and France intends to fully contribute to these efforts. At the same time, the situation in the West Bank and the East Bank and the East Jerusalem, is deteriorating severely, marked by an alarming intensification of violence. France would like to recall that the future of Gaza and of the West Bank are interconnected. Violence in the West Bank compromises prospects for lasting peace and security for Palestinians and for Israelis. The success of the peace plan for Gaza and regional stability. Mr. President, I'd like to insist on 5 very worrisome developments currently underway in the West Bank. First of all, Israeli military operations are intensifying, with the launch of a major operation in the north, leading to the forced displacement of populations, in particular in refugee camps, and violations of human rights. The summary execution of 2 unarmed Palestinians by Israeli border guards in Jenin is a tragic illustration of this violence. This incident must be fully investigated. Secondly, A massive increase of violence by settlers against Palestinian civilians has sowed terror and compromised the stability of the West Bank, as well as prospects for global comprehensive peace and security. France calls Israel to protect the Palestinian population and to punish the perpetrators of the violence. Thirdly, the recent approval by the Israeli government of 19 new outposts and the settler project E1 constitutes a flagrant violation of international law and a blow to the two-state solution. We reiterate our condemnation of the expansion of settlements and our opposition to any form of annexation of the West Bank, whether it's partial, total, or de facto. Fourthly, the persistent threats against the work of UNRWA are unacceptable, in particular the raid of its facilities in East Jerusalem in violation of the status of UN facilities. Any additional hindrance to the action of UNRWA, which plays a central role for the Palestinian population, would go against the advisory opinion of the International Court of Justice of the 22nd of October of 2025. We call on Israel to lift all obstacles to humanitarian aid and to cooperate with UN agencies. Conformity with this advisory opinion, including by opening all the crossing points and by ceasing to refuse in an arbitrary way the delivery of essential goods for the survival of the population delivered by the UN. Fifthly, the persistent refusal by the Israeli government to restore to the Palestinian Authority its tax receipts and renew the system of banking corresponding banks is unjustifiable. The weakening of the Palestinian Authority compromised its ability to implement reforms and assume its responsibilities in Gaza as anticipated by Resolution 2803. Its financial collapse would be a serious threat to regional stability and to the security of Israel. Mr. President, to conclude, France reaffirms its commitment to the two-state solution with a state of Palestine living in peace and security side by side with Israel. This is the only credible horizon for peace and security for everyone in the region, in conformity with the New York Declaration adopted in September by a very broad majority in the General Assembly. Thank you.
I thank the representative of France for the statement, and I give the floor to the representative of Algeria.